South thistle, I think, is a really good example of a weed that has been in our farming system for a long, long time, doing very little in terms of things of concern to us, and suddenly it's become a major headache. And part of that is the resistance, but part of it's also that it's actually changed to fit in our farming system. And so the response is to change the way we're managing things. And that's a combination of how we're managing South thistle, but also actually how we're managing our whole farming system. Well, South thistle is a really interesting weed. It evolved resistance to the sulfonylurea group B herbicides very early. More recently, it has evolved resistance to the imidazolinone group B herbicides, which pretty much takes that whole group out. But also we have resistance to glyphosate, and we have resistance to 2,4-D type herbicides. So we've got resistance to the three most widely used herbicides in fallows. So the general strategy for managing these glyphosate resistant weeds in the north has been the double knock strategy. It's tended to be glyphosate plus 2,4-D followed by paraquat. The glyphosate plus 2,4-D seems to be a bit antagonistic on South thistle. We've also got resistance to the 2,4-D component of that mix. That's not in the north yet, that's actually in the south. But there is no doubt that it's going to get to the north, simply because the amount of phenoxy herbicide that's being used in that fallow phase as part of double knocks. When we do get to the situation where we have glyphosate and 2,4-D and group B resistance in South thistle, that takes all of our cheap fallow herbicides out. And so fallow management is going to get much more complicated and much more difficult and much more expensive. But the other thing about South thistle is that it becomes a lot more tolerant to these herbicides the larger it is. So if you can get in and spray them, even though they're resistant, if you can get in and spray them when they're really small, you can actually get reasonable level of control out of that. So one of the tricks is don't wait. Don't wait until the summer fallow to try and control these weeds if you've got the opportunity to be able to get into the cereal crop and put a herbicide out to do it. I think the other component of that is that we can sometimes get extra control by thinking about the sort of herbicides we're putting together. So as I said, glyphosate plus 2,4-D is a little bit antagonistic, so it's probably not the mix to choose. So we might want to be thinking about in that double knock process, do we go glyphosate plus something like sharpen and then follow that with paraquat, do it that way rather than trying to change something else. So there are a range of opportunities with some of the chemistry, but I think the thing that we know about the work we've done with South thistle, with both the 2,4-D herbicides and the glyphosate herbicides, that when you let them get large, they are definitely really resistant. If you spray them when they're small, you get some control. We know from work we've done that competition in the spring period is really, really important. And so it might be that we have to think more about how we're using our cereals in those rotations. Perhaps we'll have to grow less chickpeas as part of that. So there might be some change in the cropping mix required, some change in the practices required. So, here in the south, the big issue that we're facing with South thistle is that it's becoming a major problem in our pulse crops, particularly lentils. And part of the problem with pulse crops is that they don't use all of the water during the spring period, which allows South thistle to come in. And if you end up with gaps in your pulse crops, you'll end up with South thistle in there. And the South thistle had, as I said, had resistance to the sulfonylurea herbicides, which we never used in pulses, but we have been using a lot of imidazolinone herbicide in herbicide tolerant pulses in recent times, particularly lentils. And the result has been that we've very quickly selected resistance. So now we really don't have any effective in-crop herbicides that we can use later in the crop. So we're going to be reliant on management from herbicides we're using early in the crop. And I think this is going to end up just being a problem for us. I think we really do need to find a new management strategy for that. But the end result is that we see a lot of crops where we have tight lentil rotations, so wheat lentil rotations for example, that have a lot of sow thistle growing in them at the moment. And the management for that is really paraquat plus sharpen late to dry them down so you can harvest. It doesn't necessarily kill the weed, so often they'll come back and they'll set a bit more seeds, so that's another problem for us. So I think we need to be thinking of, perhaps really quite broadly about how we manage this problem. And one of the things that we might need to do is to actually spread out our lentil crops in our rotation. Lentils have been highly profitable, so growers have been growing them closer and closer together. And I think that what that's done, because every second year we're completely failing to get control of sow thistle, we're just building the amount of sow thistle in the environment. So we might actually have to have another crop in there just to give us the chance to run the numbers down a bit in the environment. If we run the same farming system all the time, a wheat lentil rotation, we're going to have weeds that like a wheat lentil rotation.